When I was in junior high and high school, I was best friends with this guy named Mark. I'm female for context. We did everything together. He was my best friend after all. Mark had kind of a troubled life. Nothing too crazy, just kind of troubled. After high school, my mom ended up dating this really abusive guy that ended up causing me so much anxiety that I got physically ill and bedridden for almost a year. I kind of kept in touch with Mark during this time, though I had lost many of my friends due to being sick. In the time I was bedridden, Mark had met a girl and fell in love and blah blah. Normal stuff. One night I get a phone call from him and he's drunk as fuck. Tells me his girlfriend broke up with him and that he's gonna kill himself. He tells me he's laying in the middle of the road, in the country, with a gun to his head, and that he's gonna pull the trigger. I was scared shitless and begged for him to go inside and calm down. For those who are wondering, I did indeed call the cops, but I had no idea where he was to tell them his location. So I called a suicide hotline and had them phone him in. Honestly, I can't remember the rest of the night, but I know I talked to him a few more times, and he didn't kill himself. Fast forward a few years, Mark has his life together, so it seems. He lives with a new girlfriend, and they have a son together. I am better now, so we make plans, and I meet his kid and his girlfriend. All is grand, so I thought. One night he calls me drunk, and said that he's been living in his truck at his shop because he and his girlfriend have broken up, and she has kicked him out. This made me feel bad. I was living on my own at the time, so I offered him my couch for a few days until things settled down with his girlfriend. Honestly, before this incident, I never, ever thought he'd be a danger to me. I grew up with him and knew him for years. So he's staying at my house, and one day I was super hungover. I just wanted to be by myself and not talk to anyone. He knocks on my bedroom door. I tell him to come in. He instantly starts accusing me of being depressed, saying that I need to talk to someone. I politely told him that I'm not depressed and I don't need to talk, and that even if I did, now isn't a good time as I was hungover. It escalated so quickly, he had me in a bear hug so tight I couldn't escape. I was begging for him to let me go, and he just wouldn't. Eventually, I peel out of his grip, push him out of my bedroom door, and lock myself in. He proceeds to pick the lock on my bedroom door, enters, and again starts forcefully grabbing me so hard that it hurt. I again escaped and ran out of my apartment, realizing I had forgot my keys. So I ran back in, and he cornered me, and would not let me go until I told him what was wrong. At this point, I'm fucking shaking and bawling my eyes out, begging him to let me go. I don't know how I got out of it, but I did. I grabbed my keys, ran out of my apartment with no shoes on, and drove to my friend's place. I sent him a text and told him to get out of my apartment or I'm calling the police. I told him to leave the spare key behind. My friend's boyfriend escorted me home and checked my apartment to make sure he wasn't there, and he did leave the key. I had marks all over my body from fighting him off. I gave it enough time for myself and for him to calm down, and I called him to explain what he did was wrong and why. He thinks he did the right thing. So I've got him blocked on everything, and haven't talked to him since. I'm a pretty small individual, very easily targeted. I also have bright red hair and work at a gas station in a fairly small town, so it's easy to pick me out. We close up shop around 11 p.m. and I usually walk the 6 blocks home. Also, let it be known that I used to roam these streets all hours of the night and never had any problems. So one night I close up and walk home. Normal. Usually I turn into the neighborhood a few streets ahead of mine, just to avoid being on the main road. This time I turn at my usual spot and there's a car at a stop sign. It doesn't move when I walk past, and I figure they're just letting me cross first. Friendly, normal, I pass the car, turn left, and walk past the driver's side window. I don't look at the car, but out of the corner of my eye I can see the driver staring at me. Not normal. I make it about 50 feet before the car drives off. I am instantly relieved, but don't forget about the odd behavior. There's a small hill on the road, and I notice headlights behind me as I reach the bottom. I turn around, same car. Okay, no big deal. Maybe he's lost. I move to the side to give him some room to pass me. But he doesn't. The car followed me slowly from behind. I made a right turn, a left turn, and was coming up on my house. I could have just ran inside or ran to a neighbor's, but then I would risk this weirdo knowing where I live, or thinking he knows where I live. So I walked right past my house and called the cops. This dude must have heard me on the phone because he finally decided to pass me once I started giving the description of his car. I got part of his license plate number and gave it to the dispatcher. Once he was out of sight, I ran inside and hid in my living room with a butcher's knife. They sent an officer out and I saw him drive by. I also saw the car drive by one more time, too. In the paper, I read that they pulled the guy over, and all he said was that he lived on the road I initially passed him on. Not sure what any of this means, but it was definitely weird. The one thing that unsettles me the most is that night at work, a man came up to my register and proceeded to tell me, "Oh, your hair is getting longer and redder." My coworker said he might have thought I was another coworker of ours, but it was still weird. I read this sub way too much to be letting little things like that go. So much for my safe little neighborhood. At the time, I was a 25-year-old woman. I was working at a very run-down seafood restaurant on a lake out where I live in the middle of nowhere, literally 15 miles from the nearest store. I was working an evening shift, and it may have been around 7 that night. Before I go further, I would like to give some background for context. Majority of the clientele that frequented this restaurant were what many would consider trashy. There was a campground and a trailer park within a mile vicinity, and many folks lived in the campground for months at a time. So I became quite accustomed to dealing with some less than savory people and behaviors. So on this particular evening, business is pretty slow. 2 guys walk in, one older, rough-looking man and a younger, equally rough-looking man. I sit the men down and fetch them a couple of Coronas at their request. From the get-go, they are leering at me. I'm used to this kind of awkward attention from male customers, so I just roll with it, trying to at least earn a decent tip. The older man begins to not so subtly hit on me, telling me how beautiful I am and the things he would do to me. I nervously laugh and tell the man that I have a boyfriend and am not interested. I decide it would be best if I tell my manager in the kitchen about the creeper. He comes out of the kitchen and happens to see their van, the only vehicle in the parking lot. A cliché creeper, white but filthy utility van with no back windows. He stands over me as I check on the men at their table and tells me to be careful and aware. Sometime after their food has arrived and after a couple more beers, I walk over to check on these men. The older man looks up at me and sways, clearly having had one too many, and says this to me. "If you aren't going to give me anything, just go into the kitchen, get a hot dog bun and fill it with mayonnaise. Microwave it for a few seconds for me. That way I have something warm and soft to stick my dick in tonight." What in the absolute fuck? I don't even remember what I said in response. At this point, my thin veneer of customer service niceness was gone. I was mortified and told my manager. He proceeds to stand at the doorway while I present the men with their check and they pay. Seeing my manager watching them closely, they say nothing else and get into their pedo van and drive away. Flash forward a few days, this same van was seen around a small rural town, cruising by school bus stops trying to lure children over. Thank goodness they weren't successful in their attempts. So, hot dog bun creeper, let's not meet.